So thank you everyone for joining. Uh, Today I am Lauryn Ahlm and I'm an application engineer here with AdvancedTek, and I'm excited to be talking to you guys about some build warnings that you might see when you're in PreForm. So if you guys have any questions, I'll have like a segment at the end where you can either put them into chat or unmute yourselves. So if you just want to save them for then, that will be perfect. Um, so like I said, today we're going to talk about some build warnings and how you can mitigate them. And it's kind of our big picture that we want to keep in mind is that your build warnings or checks, like we would see in PreForm, your print prep software, they are really there to prevent your build failures. Kind of like your check engine light coming on telling you that something is wrong that you need to get checked out. So kind of along that line of build warnings jobs is to prevent failures. So are auto supports and auto orientation. They're to prevent failures. They are to make sure that your part is adhered to your build plate. So that's kind of your flip side that you can think about as you're setting up your print too. And now I will share my screen and I will open up our part in PreForm. And here we go. So this is kind of a generic, like a T pipe fitting. I should say like a split pipe fitting, kind of just for some PVC pipe. And when we load it in here, we notice that we already have some colors showing up. How nice. So when you load your part into PreForm, it is going to run an error check. It's going to show up as a couple of different colors. It's going to show up as red, and your orange/yellow colors there. And kind of what this is telling us is that there are some specific features on the model that are concerning, that might give you some kind of trouble as you're printing. So here, oh, I am sorry. Let me put it back. As we are looking at this here, the first one that I'm going to be going over is our orange or yellow build warning. This one means that there is a cup, there is an unvented volume, so some kind of feature that could be trapping resin or increasing surface tension in your part. And this could lead to something like a blowout, where your part either comes off of the build tray, it gets suctioned off, or there's just kind of some split in your part that happens. Usually those end up being pretty messy. If you have printed with your resin printer for quite a while, you are probably familiar with those, and they can take a while to clean up. So that's why we see these warnings. Trying to save you time, trying to save you material, all those fun things. One of the ways that I would typically go about preventing this is I would just prop this part up off of the build tray. So if we go to our support option, this is kind of our first line of defense, I would say. And I'm just going to use our auto generate feature here. We will generate these supports, and I have small touch points on right now. So if you're curious why they might look a little bit different to how yours would, that's kind of what's up. And so once we generate these supports, we can see that there is no longer a cup warning here. That's because we've added venting to that part. There's now a space for that air and that resin to escape and to not be trapped and to not create such intense suction on that part. So that remedies it. However, something else that you might be considering now is there are a lot of supports all over my part. I don't know if I want to deal with all of that post-processing. I don't know how we're going to deal with that. That might slow us down. So another option that we would then have is to reorient our part. So I'm going to clear our supports, going to exit out of our support menu, and we see that that cup comes right back. That warning comes right back for us. So if we are looking at a way to prevent that cup from happening, we need to add some kind of vent. We need to add some kind of way for air to get into that part / escape that part. Now you can rotate it potentially to that side, because what we're doing there is we're just creating that option for air to escape. That's a simple one, but then we see a new warning pop up over here. So we're not going to talk about that one quite yet. I'm going to just finish going through our cupping option. I'm going to Control Z that part, get it reoriented back to where we see that warning again. So one of our really nice features that we can see in PreForm is that we actually have over here on this right very bottom option, we have this whole feature. If you have something like this somewhere in your part where we see a cupping error, we know that there's going to be resin trapped. We can actually use this option to drill a hole in your part where we can change the diameter, we can change the depth and the padding. I'm going to just kind of decrease this one down to like maybe a 4mm hole, just for the sake of effect. We can add it wherever we would like in here. I'm going to add it towards that bottom of the part, and we're going to apply the edit. We can see that, so this might not be an option for everybody because this does add a hole to your part. This is something that can be potentially filled in with epoxy, or you could potentially make a small diameter plug that would work to actually insert back into the part. But this can be a great option for very large parts that have maybe a cup that's higher up on your part. That's a little bit more tricky to get to and more tricky to kind of orient out of that concerning area. So as we see here, it's added this little hole for venting, and we do not have that cupping error anymore. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of mitigate that risk there. And then hopefully, I shouldn't even say hopefully, now we're not even going to have to worry about potentially having to clean up a very resiny mess from blowout. So our next warning that we might see, I'm going to actually tilt our part again like we did earlier, because then we can see this unsupported minima right here. So these regions here that have these little tiny red outlines, it's outlined by layer. This region will not print, which if you've designed your model in such a way that it has every feature that you need every feature printed. That's kind of the entire point of 3D printing, design for manufacturing, all of those fun things, right? So what we need to do then is get rid of that error. We need to make sure that that model is supported, it has something to build off of. The reason why this would pop up is because it is not at the required angle. It does not have the required support for it to branch off to and branch off from and build off of, like we have over here. So we have this nice angle on this part down at this lower region where there's enough material beneath it for it to build off of in those increments. Over here, it's expecting this part to just be starting to build from nowhere in space. We need to add some kind of support there, or we need to orient our part differently. So our easiest option, in my opinion, would typically be to just reorient it. But as we've seen before, that's just going to give us either another cup, or if we orient it too far in the other direction, it's going to give us another little red warning. So if we Control Z that, we can go for our other option here, which is adding some supports. And one nice thing, if you prefer to place all of your supports manually, you can choose to support all minima. That way it does kind of your essential spots to get rid of those warnings, such as on this edge here and down at this very bottom, and then you have free reign to place the remainder of your supports wherever you want them to go. But by at least selecting that option, you know that your minima will be supported and all of those areas will print for you. They're not going to be cut out to mitigate risk. So let's just say that we're going to generate this structure, although this would still be under-supported because we can see all these other general red patches, even though they're not outlined over here. Those are still areas that need more support. If we generate this structure, you guys can just see a little bit better that it does generate those touch points for you, which is fantastic. And you could go through, like I said, actually add in all of your desired touch points that you need. Oh, goodness. Anyways, another option that we could have at this point is potentially redesigning our part. Although this might not be an option for everybody, this could potentially be one if you cannot have any support pips on there. even though you can also reduce the size of your touch points, which is very nice, and you can reduce the size of those scars, that still might not be an option for you. Say it's something with a really critical radius that you cannot have interfered with at all, or you're really trying to minimize your post-processing needs. This is something where we might want to use a design guide like Formlabs has, and we might want to redesign / re-engineer some areas of our part to make them more printable. Say if we were redoing this edge potentially, so that way we could build this at a slant and only have some supports kind of towards the bottom of our part, and there's still enough space for everything else to work on. We might want to widen this angle that it is built at. So instead of branching off here, it starts maybe a few layers up. That angle starts a few layers up from where that red mark is. So that can really increase your printability, reduce some of those errors that you might see. And that can be an option if you're really trying to design your manufacturing needs for 3D printing. And I think another error that we could talk about too is one that is a little bit harder because I can't show it in PreForm necessarily. But if you are seeing some delamination of your parts, or you're seeing maybe a break in them as they're building, you're seeing some layers peeling away from each other, that's again what we would call delamination. And that comes from when there is too much surface tension on that part and it's not supported enough, or potentially where there is not enough of venting. So that's a time when you either want to add a hole or you'd want to add more supports, or potentially both, depending upon how bad that issue is showing up for you. And I think that that kind of concludes all of what I have prepared for today. But if you guys have any questions, maybe there's a build warning that you have seen personally that you weren't entirely sure how to handle, or if there's just any other questions that you have about SLA or DLP type printing, you can drop them in the chat or unmute yourself, and I'm happy to talk through them. Let's see here. Could the outlets of the T all be placed horizontally? And would that change it in the software? Let's see here. So I can share what I have. And let me open back up PreForm and we can talk about that a little bit. That's a great question. So this way we can see kind of a better picture of it. It's always 50-50 if I choose the right one, you know. All right. So when we choose this option, because there are no external features on this T, there's nothing that would be propping it up and kind of obscuring features from being built in free space. This could be an option for us, which would be awesome. The only thing to consider now is that these areas can be under supported potentially. These pink areas are options for where you can put supports successfully. So this could work for us. Thankfully, this is a pretty simple design, and this could be a good option. If we are looking at where we would need support on here and we go to our manual placement, we can see that this is still technically an under-supported model. So I might add some supports along the bottom here, kind of in this type of pattern, to really add a little bit more safety as we're printing. And same with up here, because even though that could print, it might not be our best option. Again, in here, you might want to add some supports too, but these ones are still these features will still be printable. They're just highlighted because they have less support than the others. Let's see here. Saw that there were a couple of other questions. I hope that that answers that for you a little bit. Let's see here. And for the hole size, is the minimum size dependent upon the material? So I would say yes, generally, because there are some materials that are thicker and that only have certain micron slices. Some of them you can get smaller, finer feature details on. But I can actually add, I believe that we can send out a build guide that Formlabs has that is super helpful. I need to double check what the exact diameter is for you, but I could get back to you on that. In general, I would say that elastomers have a larger minimum hole size than rigid materials. And what material would we use for faster prints on the Formlabs Form Series? I would personally use something like draft gray. If you're looking to print something really fast and you don't necessarily care as much about the mechanicals there, I would use that. This is something that can print, I believe, at about like 30 millimeters an hour. It's pretty fast. It can, I should actually, a better way of phrasing that is that it can build the entire chamber of a Form 4 in about 2 hours, which is incredibly impressive. So that's a super high speed print. And would these tips also apply to building on a Stratasys Neo printer? So Stratasys Neo printers, I guess if you guys have seen a Formlabs Fuse, you know that they, or I should say a Formlabs Form, they build from this platform up here, this vat of resin down here, getting dipped in, pulled out, dipped in, pulled out. So the forces there are more of pull forces that we're seeing. If we're talking about Stratasys Neo, there's that vat of resin that the build platform is submerged in, and your part is submerged in the entire time. So that part is being subjected to more push forces. That's something to keep in mind as you're orienting your parts, but in general, needing drainage holes, needing some venting sometimes, those can all be factors still on your Stratasys Neo printer. So I have noticed with the Form 4L that when I have the majority of my plate, it does a pretty loud, almost Velcro sound when pulling from the screen. Is there a possibility of your part being taken off of your plate if using non-full raft in that case? So I would say yes. I guess when you say a non-full raft, if you are printing your part directly on the plate, I assume that that's kind of what you're referring to, Nick, but you can correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. So if you're printing your part directly on your plate and it is an unvented volume, there is certainly a possibility of it being pulled off. That surface tension, it sounds like you have some very high surface tension on there. And that can just pull that part directly off of that tray and suck it back into that resin. Usually use a full raft in the support settings and build support trays to the part. Well, that should keep it on there. Another thing that you can consider is potentially the membrane of your build tray. You can check just how many prints slash how many passes have happened on there on your Form Series printer. And that membrane might just be starting to get worn out potentially. So that might be something that we could fix by either changing out your build tray, changing out the membrane, depending upon what kind of printer you have exactly. When the part seems to be directly on the build plate and you add some manual supports, it seems to add an elephant's foot to the part. That is something that I have faced personally, and I have not found a way to prevent that, actually. So that's something that I actually want to talk to the Formlabs team about and kind of give them some feedback on, because I would really love to be able to add supports without having to have that exactly. See, and I've been noticing it more, especially with the Tough 1500 V2. Yes, so Tough 1500, that is a very thick resin. I have actually experienced what you are talking about personally with that one. And so that does have something to do with the viscosity of that resin too. That increases your surface tension as well. And that is something that we can consider also. So you might need to space your parts differently potentially. And if you're using a 4L, are you using a flex build tray or are you using a standard build tray? Flex build. So that's another thing that you can consider is potentially using a non-flex version. Because that might be that flex build tray bending and then snapping back into place as your parts are being built. I've experienced that exact same thing with the same material. for us, switching to that standard build tray really made a difference. And how to remove a texture once it's added to the part. Let me show you my screen one more time. Thank you guys for all the questions. This has been an awesome, super just like helpful go through, I think. So let's see here. I'm going to say add a texture to our part. If you apply it, I assume that you're talking about having already applied it and wanting to go back and remove it. This is something that I don't believe that we have the option to remove it once you've already applied it, unless you kind of Control Z remove it from our part. Because when I go in here and I hit our texture button, I'm not seeing any option for us to really remove it, unfortunately. That is again something that we could potentially give Formlabs some feedback about. So if we go and we just Control Z, that is a feature that is still in beta. So they might be looking for some feedback on how to improve it too. I know that's not maybe the most satisfying answer, but hopefully that is at least something that's a little bit helpful. And I think that we have time for one more question. To be able to do single axis scaling. That's a great question. Let's see here. I don't know of anything personally in the works right now. Again, I think that we've gotten some good feedback to pass on to our Formlabs friends. So that is another something that we could pass on to them. But as of right now, I don't know of anything personally. I know that could be helpful for a lot of people though. Awesome. Well, I think that we have had a great session today. Thank you all for chatting, putting your questions in. That makes it super, I think, helpful for all of us. I think that we all really get a lot out of it. If you guys happen to have any suggestions or anything that you'd want to see for our next AE² topic, please feel free to send it to us. Contact either your rep or me directly. We are happy to really make these more customized to you, to our customers, and make sure that you're getting the most out of them. So thank you all. I hope that you guys have a great day, and we will see you next time.